So, I want to start with a story. Picture this. It's 1982, and a young archaeologist is out on his first dig in a tiny Greek village. One evening, he sees an old man, Mr. George, coming down the road riding a donkey. But walking right beside him is his wife, an old woman absolutely bent over, carrying this massive sack on her back. So the student, trying to be helpful, gets an interpreter and asks Mr. George, "Hey, why isn't your wife riding the donkey?"
And Mr. George just kind of smiles and gives this perfectly simple, obvious answer. He says, "She doesn't have one." A donkey, that is. To him, this wasn't weird at all. It was just the way things were. A kind of unwritten law. The man rides, the woman walks. That's it.
And right there, that's the puzzle we're going to solve. Why do we hear that story and just cringe? Why does it feel so deeply wrong to us? But to him, it was completely normal. This little moment of culture shock, it's not just some quirky anecdote. It's a clue that takes us all the way down to the very foundation of our own moral beliefs. And the answer, believe it or not, has everything to do with energy.
To get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at a really powerful idea from a historian named Ian Morris. He argues that our deeply held values, what we think is right and wrong, fair or unfair, they aren't these magical, timeless truths that fall from the sky. Nope, there's something way more practical.
Here's his core idea, and it's a big one. Each age gets the thought it needs. So what does that even mean? Well, put simply, our values are tools. They are functional adaptations to the world around us. And the single most important thing about any society is how it gets its energy, whether that's from hunting and gathering, from farming, or from fossil fuels.
Let's unpack that, because this is the key. It's like a chain reaction. First up, how you get your energy determines how big your society can be, how dense it is. Then, that social structure determines the best way to organize everybody, the politics, the economy, even families. And finally, those social structures reward certain values and punish others. The values that help that particular society survive and thrive, those are the ones that stick around. Okay, to really see how this works, we're going to go on a super quick tour through the three massive energy ages of human history, and you'll see how each one created a completely different set of moral rules.
Now, take a look at this timeline. What should really jump out at you is just the sheer scale of it all. For a staggering 95% of the time humans have been on Earth, every single one of us was a forager, a hunter-gatherer. Farming is pretty recent, and our fossil fuel age, it's just a tiny, tiny blip. So that means for almost all of human history, foraging values were our factory setting.
So what did that actually look like? Well, think about it. If you're always on the move, chasing your food, you can't really own much stuff, right? This created a world that was fiercely egalitarian. They hated hierarchy. They had a deep, visceral aversion to it. Anyone who tried to get too big for their britches, act like a chief, they'd get knocked right back down, usually with some pretty savage jokes. The values that mattered were sharing, cooperation, and your own personal freedom.
And this quote, this just perfectly sums it all up. When an anthropologist asked an Ona forager if his people had chiefs, this is what he said. What does it mean? It means there's no single boss. Everyone is in charge of themselves. It's a perfect encapsulation of forager politics. Radical equality wasn't just some nice idea, it was a survival strategy.
But then, about 10,000 years ago, everything changed. We figured out how to domesticate plants and animals, and this one invention completely flipped the forager world upside down. Farming wasn't just a new way to get dinner, it created a need for a totally different kind of human, with a totally different rulebook for how to live.
Just look at the difference here. It's night and day. Farming forces you to stay in one place. That creates property, stored food, and wealth that needs to be defended. Suddenly, those old forager values, sharing everything, no one's the boss, they went from being a survival guide to being a recipe for disaster. This new world needed hierarchy, it needed authority, and it needed people to accept massive levels of inequality. Kings and priests weren't evil, they were necessary to keep the whole complex system from collapsing.
And that world, the world of the farmer, dominated the planet for 10,000 years. That's Mr. George's world, right? But then, only about 250 years ago, boom, another revolution hits. We cracked open the earth and found this incredible buried treasure of energy in the form of coal, oil, and gas. And just like farming, this new fire hose of energy demanded a whole new set of values to go with it.
So this is all fascinating history, but here's the really cool part. We can actually see these layers of history in our world right now. We don't have to guess. We have the data.
This wild-looking chart is from something called the World Values Survey. It's this massive ongoing project that's interviewed hundreds of thousands of people about what they believe. It plots countries on two main scales. One goes from traditional to more secular rational values, and the other goes from basic survival values up to self-expression values. And as you can see, countries tend to clump together in really interesting ways.
But let's boil all that complexity down. If you just sort countries by how they get their energy, a super clear pattern just snaps into focus. Societies that are still largely based on agriculture, they consistently land on the side of traditional and survival values. Things like religion, respect for authority, and national pride are huge. But societies that run on fossil fuels, they cluster over on the side of secular rational and self-expression values. They care way more about individual liberty, gender equality, and personal happiness. The correlation is it's right there in the data. It's impossible to ignore.
All right, let's pull all these threads together. We've seen this incredible story play out across three huge eras of history. How the energy we use shapes the society we build, which in turn shapes our deepest ideas of right and wrong. So here's the big takeaway. Mr. George, back in that Greek village with his farming values, he saw a world where hierarchy was natural and gender roles were rigid because those values worked for a low-energy agricultural world. And us, we're swimming in an ocean of fossil fuel energy. So we've developed values that work for our world, one that celebrates political and gender equality, even while we tolerate huge economic inequality. We're shocked by him, but he'd be just as shocked by us. It's not that we're right and he's wrong. It's that our values are functional for our environment and his were functional for his.
And that, of course, leaves us with one massive and honestly kind of scary question. Our entire moral operating system, our bedrock beliefs in equality, human rights, individual freedom, all of it was forged in the fire of fossil fuels. We all know that era is coming to an end. So, as the energy changes again, what happens to our values? What's the thought that the next age is going to need?